Okay, let's come on to, I believe, women.
Women and the Supreme Court. Yes, back in November last year, I reported on the case which was brought to the Supreme Court in London by For Women Scotland. Can we just concerning the interpretation of the definitions and the protected characteristics as set out by both the Gender Recognition Act 2004 and the Equality Act 2010. In essence, what constitutes sex and or gender and what a man or a woman actually is. Now, before going any further, I think it's worth reflecting on the fact that in a society that's described as both civilized and progressive, we are, first of all, confused by such definitions, and secondly, we require a Supreme Court to try to make sense of it. Nonetheless, the judgment arrived at is not brief. It is very wordy, and to an extent, it obfuscates its own significance. But the result heralded is that common sense has prevailed, because the two pieces of legislation to which I've just referred are to be read in such a way as to suggest that biological sex at birth, which will determine whether or not a person may be considered a woman or a man in law. But there's rather more to it than that. The Supreme Court has adjudicated that the language used in these two acts does not contradict that of the Sexual Discrimination Act 1975, which made it clear that sex was inextricably linked to biology, and furthermore that it was binary, so you are either a man or a woman. So with regard to the misuse of the definitions, the Supreme Court has now stated that, quote, "We can identify no good reason why the legislature should have intended that sex-based rights and protections under the Equality Act 2010 should apply to these complex heterogeneous groupings rather than to the distinct group of biological women and girls, or men and boys, with their shared biology leading to shared disadvantage and discrimination faced by them as a distinct group." Slightly confusing language, but in effect saying that the legislation is much more simple than it's been taken as being. Now, the fact that this is being reported in a news programme at all shows just how far, of course, the judiciary in particular has been blown, and the relentless pressure from the outside and the continued insistence that anyone can be any gender and that this overrides the significance of biological sex has undoubtedly been succumbed to. If it were not the case, there could not have been the need to bring this to court in the first place. And as I say, the judgment is very detailed. There will be a link to it in the show notes, but to get a better understanding of how well-funded activism and political pressure may pervert the course of justice, I would recommend reading it. The other significant detail in the judgment is the impact upon people with what's called a gender recognition certificate, who had been led to believe that holding such a thing made you belong to the sex of your choice. This is not the case, and it never was. However, since there are protections for those undergoing what's called gender reassignment, this should be considered a red herring. But of course, given the intensely emotional and vitriolic nature of the debate, it's the grey areas like this which look set to keep the level of tension high and indeed perpetuate it. Fortunately for the Labour government, the voting public have terribly short memories, for otherwise they would remember some of the remarks from their upper echelons. Keir Starmer said not too long ago that saying that only women have a cervix is something that shouldn't be said. And David Lammy said that women who value women-only spaces where they feel safe from male violence are dinosaurs who want to hoard rights. So that is where we are. It's 2025, and we need the highest court in the land to tell us what is a man and what is a woman. Turns out it was written down perfectly correctly in the first instance. So there we are. That leads us.
Well, David Lammy has featured quite a bit on this program today, and we're going to have to end with David Lammy as well.
I'm afraid we are, and in the spirit of not discriminating, it should be made clear that abject ignorance is no barrier to holding high office. And we look back to 2013, obviously considering the news that the Pope has died recently. Back in 2013, the BBC put out a tweet that said, live video, chimney of Sistine Chapel as conclave votes for Pope. Will smoke be black or white? And David Lammy responded on Twitter, not ironically, saying, "This tweet from the BBC is crass and unnecessary. Do we really need silly innuendo about the race of the next Pope?" So there we are. In the incredibly unlikely situation that you're not sure what that refers to, the colour of the smoke coming out of the chimney, of course, has absolutely nothing to do with the colour of the Pope, but nonetheless, it has prompted somebody to ask an artificial intelligence bot, or whatever it's called, to create a fictional image of Lammy himself, were he to hold that particular office, and indeed a bucket of what looks like Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Yes.
So there we go, with apologies to anybody that's shocked by this image and the many references to David Lammy in this programme.
Yes, indeed. Well, look, we've got to leave it there for today. I'm going to say thank you very much to Vanessa and to Sandy for joining us today. Thank you all for watching. We'll be back in a couple of minutes' time if you're a UK Column member for some UK Column News Extra. Don't forget the interview at 1 p.m. tomorrow. And we'll be back at 1 p.m. on Friday, as usual, for another UK Column News. We'll see you then. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.